Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the CDFA Brown Bag Lunch and Learn with Pride Industries. Today we have Darylyn Pasdell, who is the Vice President of Pride Industries. And she's going to give us a presentation today on Pride Industries' mission and how employment can benefit people with disabilities. And with that, we'll let her take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. And I do have a PowerPoint. I was telling her earlier, I'm famous for using PowerPoints about 50% of the time. So I will begin it and then we'll see how I do. If I could just get a yes, you can see it.
I can see it.
Awesome.
I can see it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. As she mentioned, my name is Darylyn Pasdell. I'm our Vice President for Workforce Inclusion with Pride Industries. I've been with Pride Industries for 26 years, so I'm super young. I began in our company 26 years ago as a counselor, working one-on-one with people with disabilities, and I've grown through the company. I've gained a passion for our company, and I love to talk about how we can include people with disabilities. So for me, I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. I'd really like this to be an interactive time for you. Please stop me if you have questions. We don't need to wait until the end. It won't bother me at all if you interrupt me and just say, hey, wait a minute. A few things I'm going to run through. The Americans with Disabilities Act, appropriate for today. Disability Pride Month, just a little bit about what that is and what it means. A few statistics. A summary on disabilities, how to be an ally to individuals with disabilities, disability inclusion, and then really the meat of it is how to attract employees, how to hold inclusive meetings, and then of course I would be remiss if I didn't share a little bit about the company I love so much. So today, right on track, is the 33rd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I'm sure you know. But I'm not sure if you know that it actually began way back in the 70s, and it began in cities and towns throughout the United States when people with disabilities began to challenge the societal barriers that excluded them from their own communities. Parents of children with disabilities began to fight against inclusion or exclusion, the segregation of their children. People worked for years organizing and attending protests, drafting legislation, rewriting it, speaking, testifying, being arrested, doing whatever they could for the cause that they believed in. The first actual teeth for legal action began in 1973 when they passed Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and that banned discrimination on the basis of disability, but only by recipients of federal funds. So it was a little bit of a step. It viewed them as a minority group. Fast forwarding under the Bush administration, they deregulated Section 504. And then during much of the 80s, disability community efforts in Washington were focused on reinstating civil rights protections. So there were sit-ins. The longest one on record, although I haven't really searched recently, was 28 days in San Francisco. For a sit-in. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was introduced to Congress in 1988. They went back and forth. They talked about what it meant to have a disability, what was included in the passage, and then it was introduced as a formal bill in 1988. And following hearings, we celebrated on July 26, 1990 with the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I actually remember that day. I didn't work for Pride Industries, but I have a friend who used a wheelchair, and I remember the celebrations. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Judy Heumann. We call her the mother of disability rights movements. And if you don't mind, this is a 3-minute clip. She did pass away this year, but this is a perfect summary of the fight for the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Judy Heumann, who has been called the mother of the disability rights movement, has died at the age of 75. President Biden, in a statement noting her passing, called her a, quote, trailblazer, a rolling warrior for disability rights in America. Human, who lost her ability to walk at age 2 after contracting polio, lobbied for legislation that led to the passage of the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act. Tonight, we hear her in her own words as we revisit her brief but spectacular take on the disability rights movement.
When I was 5 years old in Brooklyn, New York on East 38th Street, my mother did what every other parent did when their kid was 5. She took me to school to register me. And this was in the early 1950s. There were no motorized wheelchairs. So she pushed me to school and it wasn't accessible. She pulled me up the steps and the principal said I couldn't go to school because I was a fire hazard. I don't really know that there was an explanation. It just was. I think the average person, they see disability as a threat to not being able to do things as people have typically done them. And I think there's truth in that. But the question is it because one has a disability or because society itself has constructed itself in such a way because they haven't seen us? Discrimination against disabled people has existed from the beginning of time. And we're in a place right now where, because of other movements, civil rights movement, the women's movement, Black Lives Matter movement, etc., people are speaking up and out. One of the first pieces of legislation that the disability community really engaged in was getting regulations developed for a provision of law called Section 504. Section 504 says you can't discriminate against someone who has a disability if the entity is receiving money from the federal government. It was the first time that many of these young disabled people felt a part of something and really felt that they were making a difference, not only for their lives, but for the lives of many others. There is a shift, I believe, going on in our society where we're looking at race and gender, equality and disability as issues that we need to address, that diversity is something that makes our companies stronger, that diverse businesses provide better services for customers. I also am a very big believer that the disability rights community cannot stand on its own. We need to be working with all other movements, and we want all other movements to be inclusive of disabled people. If we are actively learning and working together, we can do things like make sure when housing is being built in our communities that it's accessible, not just for people who have physical disabilities today, but if you're going to have a physical disability tomorrow. I think having a disability really has allowed me to do and get in touch with so many things and opportunities that otherwise would not have happened. People look at us as the label of our disability. And it is a part of who we are, but it is not who we are. My name is Judy Human, and this is my brief but spectacular take on the disability rights movement.
Hers was.
So I'll have to stop sharing. I apologize. I don't know how that happened. So I had the pleasure of meeting Judy a few years ago, and her dynamic presence in a room was all I needed to know about her efforts for the Americans with Disabilities Act, I have to say. Leading us into Pride Disability Month. When I first saw this flag a few years ago, it was in chevron kind of different frames, and the lady who created it received feedback that it was uneasy on eyes for people with neurodiverse disabilities. So she created this stripe in a flag, and I thought it was kind of interesting. It's not by accident that we celebrate Disability Pride Month in July in connection with the ADA Act passing. But the colors I thought were interesting, and I won't read them to you. You can see them on the screen, but they're purposeful colors to celebrate each of the different disability possibilities. And then I think it's nice to point out that 1 in 4 people in our country are impacted by a disability. So of all of us on this call, 2 of us most likely have a disability. And that's growing. The new statistic after the next census will come out that 61 million adults in the United States need advocacy and rights. And of those individuals, now we can talk a little bit about work. So of the 61 million adults, 24% of them are actively pursuing employment or are employed. That's compared to people without disabilities, which is nearly 3 times the number of people who are participating in the job market. The unemployment rate for adults with disabilities, and that's defined as anyone 16 years or older, is nearly double that of people without disabilities. It is going down. You can see we've made a little headway in a year, but this is evidence that our advocacy and inclusion efforts are working, and also reminds us that we need to carry on. So people ask, well, what's a disability? How do you define a disability? Really, that's individual. We have person-centered processes and plans for a reason. Not one person has a disability exactly the same as another, but we can categorize. So there are 7 different areas where we can categorize. Not one is easier than the other. There's been discussion with developmental versus intellectual disabilities. Our industry now says intellectual and developmental disabilities. So developmental is a broad term that describes conditions which can be intellectual as well as physical, neurological, and sensory, whereas an intellectual disability really describes those of a cognitive disability, such as problem solving or memory. And that, how are we become allies for people with disabilities? So we've looked at legislation, we've looked at what our country has done to support people with disabilities. We've kind of talked a little bit about how many there are, what they look like, but what can we do as employers, as neighbors, as friends? So being an ally, this is a definition from Daily Work. An ally is someone who supports and advocates for the equality, equity, dignity, and rights of oppressed people groups, of which not all are part of. An ally is also someone who challenges people and systems who consciously and unconsciously perpetuate oppression against those oppressed groups. That's an ally for any group, specifically for people with disabilities today. So now we defined that. How do we do it? How do we become an ally for people with disabilities? How do we erase the uncomfortable feeling when we approach someone in a wheelchair, or we approach someone who is using a hearing aid or a walking stick? The first and foremost piece of advice that I would give to anyone is using people first language. We've come a long way in our society with languages, so we want to try to use languages that describe a person's disability without making it their defining characteristic. An example: you might say people who are blind or visually impaired, as opposed to saying the blind, and people with disabilities, not the disabled, so that you always keep the person first. It's also now preferred to say accessible rather than handicapped. For example, with our parking, we don't call it handicapped parking, we call it accessible. They're not handicapped restrooms and entrances, they're accessible, meaning open to all, included in all. Speaking directly to a person with a disability, I don't know if you've ever walked up to someone and you just don't even know how to begin a sentence. If the person with the disability has a friend, a colleague, a caregiver, a family member, don't speak to their companion and who's with them. Speak directly to them, eye contact, eye level if you can. And then you're leaving a restaurant or a store and someone in a wheelchair is approaching the door. Do you run and open that door? Probably not. That highlights what they cannot do. So simply asking, how can I help, is more respectful than making assumptions about what a person can or cannot do. If the person says they don't need help, don't insist. If they do want assistance, listen carefully to their needs before stepping in. I think education is key to how we become allies for people with disabilities. So arm yourself with knowledge, become acquainted with obstacles that marginalized groups of people with disabilities have faced, and what progress still needs to be made. You can do a simple Google search. What are people with disabilities struggling with today? And you will find all kinds of legislative examples of ways you can become involved. An example might be reading about laws for wheelchair access, deaf and hard of hearing assistive technology laws and regulations. And then assumptions. We all make assumptions. They're natural. We wake up with them, we go to bed with them. But remember not to assume that you know about someone's disability or what they need. Be respectful and ask, put them first. And then my final suggestion for how to be an ally is to use your voice. If there's a disability rights protest, join it. If your district's having trying to pass a bill, support it. Write in, call your legislator, fix the problem. Ask people what we can do for them as their voice. And then there's disability inclusion. So we have inclusion, DEI inclusion. We have marginalized groups from various different places, parts, people, generations. Disability inclusion is not unlike any other inclusion in our society, in our lives. It's simply making sure everyone has the same opportunities to participate in every aspect of their life to the best of their abilities and desires. Not everyone wants everything exactly like their neighbors. So, disability inclusion in the workplace. Having an inclusive workplace means that people are valued regardless of their roles. And feeling safe to include psychological safety. I think those are the two most important pieces of disability inclusive workplaces. It's having a workplace that means they're valued and them feeling safe to include psychological safety. So how do we promote an inclusive workplace? It starts at the top. It starts with the leaders. It starts with the leaders' team, their teams, and the initiatives all the way down. If your top leadership understands that promoting an inclusive workplace with any marginalized group, it becomes part of your core values. Training is very, very important. People need to understand what an inclusive workplace means. They need to understand what inclusive language is. They need to develop the interaction between peers that includes inclusive language and training. And then recruiting, hiring. This is a way to not only infuse your workplace with inclusion, but to help train new people in your industry, on your teams, on what inclusion is. And it only takes one person, I've noticed, on a team to adapt a 100% inclusive mentality for it to leak into other areas and to be adopted as the norm. And then when you have people with disabilities, you want to support them. Again, we talked about being an ally. It's asking them, it's not making assumptions. It's giving them what they need to be the best that they can be. And you want to communicate your inclusion plan far and wide. So if your plan is to make an effort to hire people with disabilities, we communicate that across the board to your recruiting individuals, to your peers, to other departments. And then finally, all of this is no good if we don't measure results. So if we don't take a snapshot of what our inclusion looks like today compared to what it looks like after all of these efforts, we won't know if all of that worked. This is where I love to get involved because this is the industry that we're in. And you heard Judy say a few things about why you should hire a person with a disability. So the first one, investing in diversity actually leads to financial gains. According to a 2018 report that was published in Accenture, companies that prioritize the inclusion of individuals with disabilities were 4 times more likely to outperform their competitors in shareholder returns. So on average, 28% higher, and then they doubled the net income and 30% higher profit margins. And that was in 2018. It's an untapped workforce and it's a valuable resource. You saw the numbers of the participants that are willing People with disabilities are overlooked because of the stigma that comes along with their disabilities. But employers who abandon the stereotypes, who open up their operations, gain highly skilled employees with substantial motivation, and they typically exceed expectations. Not only are the individuals eager and willing to take on a variety of employment opportunities, many of them have valuable skill sets to offer, stemming from their diverse backgrounds and their experiences, and we just don't look there first. And then turnover. I don't know if you struggle with retention and turnover in any of your departments, but employee turnover is really the bane of a company's existence. You get them trained, and then the next department says, thank you for training them, I'll take them now. But the Department of Labor found that employers who support those with disabilities saw an increase in employee retention. That's because offering reasonable accommodations is often significantly less costly than firing workers. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So how do we attract employees with disabilities? There's an estimated 2.2% of adults in the United States with autism, for example. So according to the Center for Disease Control and Presentation, 85% of adults with autism are unemployed. I don't know if you've interacted with individuals with autism. I would say that in our workforce and my department alone, I probably have 10% of my workforce are people who identify with autism. Probably the best hires we've ever made. It takes you take a bias inventory and look at your candidates. And for example, JP Morgan Chase, they implemented a hiring program to attract neurodiverse employees. They went out and marketed. Their recruiting departments held special events, and they encouraged people to disclose their disability when they were recruiting at the very beginning. That eliminated the fear of, do I say something? Do I not say something? And allowed them the discussion of accommodations right up front. And many employers, myself included, were afraid of the cost of accommodations. And really, most of them are free or cost less than $500. For an example, we have a quiet area that we set up with headphones, and we allow flexible breaks so that if someone becomes overstimulated, they can take an extra break, reset, and come back to work. ERGs are a very good way to attract employees with disabilities. That improves community engagement, the allyship, connections, and the growth career. So now that we've attracted and recruited them, and I can give you information on programs that have been set up to do that, now we have them on board. So let's talk about, now that they're here, how do we make a meeting inclusive for a person with a neuro disability or really any disability? And there are just a few things that you can do. And I'm focusing on people with autism just for the purposes of the meeting here. But knowing what's coming alleviates anxiety about unfamiliar situations. So printing agendas in advance, and in advance, I mean a few days, not a few hours. That eliminates their stress of what they're walking into. A meeting should have a purpose so that ambiguity doesn't cause unnecessary stress. I've mentioned language in the past, inclusive language, but plain language is very, very important. So we say things like brainstorming or out of the box. Those don't make sense. There's a metaphors that do not equal anything, and it stresses them out because they don't understand what we're saying. So instead of brainstorming, we would say, let's all think together. Instead of out of the box, we would say, let's look at how we can change things. Written instructions for activities. For example, if you're going to a place off-site, detailed maps with as much information as you can. If you want someone to be prepared for the meeting, for example, have notes or things prepared, written instructions so that they can refer to it. And as often as you have reoccurring meetings, try to keep those meetings routine. One little glitch in a routine meeting causes a surprise and also increases anxiety. And then sensory retreat spaces. Oftentimes in meetings, I'll lose someone here or there who will go take a 2 or 3 minute into the quiet area just to slow down the stimulation. It's overwhelming. We tend to get into a meeting around a table, I don't know, 5-10 people, And at the beginning of the meeting, everyone is speaking at the same time. That's called socialization. We catch up on what we did for the weekend. You know, did you hear about so-and-so's wedding? That's overstimulating. So oftentimes I will have people wait and join the meeting 10 minutes after we've begun, when all of that overstimulation has ended. So I mentioned breaks and then seating preferences. I know this sounds funny, but some individuals with neurodiverse disabilities would rather sit in a corner facing a window, not towards the door, or with space around them. So the pandemic taught us that 6 foot. That's super important to some individuals in meetings. So I have another little video for you. This is called Flip the Script, and this is a video of a person coming into a meeting with a disability. Let's see if I can do better on this one.
Hi, Tom. This meeting was supposed to start 10 minutes ago.
I don't hear Tom. I'll talk to his job coach, make sure he's prompt to meetings.
Do you know if he's learned to use the white cane yet?
I don't know. I hear Tom now.
Sorry, guys. Sorry.
Okay, hello. Sorry, Steve.
No,
sorry. I'm not Steve. I'm Grant. That's Steve.
Grant, I'm sorry, Grant. Okay.
Thanks so much for coming. We need to get rolling on this meeting. We only have 45 minutes and a lot to discuss today.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry I was late, Mary.
Tom, you're first up on the agenda. We need to go over those numbers for the first quarter.
I'm sorry. Where's the agenda?
Right in front of you.
Sorry, Mary. I can't actually see anything.
I don't know if this sighted guy was such a good idea.
You can't say sighted guy.
Okay, a guy with sight. Okay, he's really slowing us down.
You have to be patient with people like Tom. 85% of them are unemployed, and it's our job to include them in our diversity hiring. Tom, do you know how to read?
Yes, Mary, I know how to read.
In Braille?
No. Look, if I could just get some light, I can read just fine.
If you could just get some light. Facilities is going to have a fit that's going to take over their entire budget. Oh my gosh. We're going to rewire the whole building so one guy can't see.
All right, let's do this. Grant, let's get some light in here. I want to get this agenda translated from Braille, and I think we should have the meeting around 3:30 this afternoon.
Okay, well, we'll see what we can do.
All right, sounds good. Tom, we're waiting.
I'm sorry. Could I get a stronger light here, maybe?
A stronger light?
Okay, let me see what I can do.
Can you start the meeting? We need you to go over those numbers.
It's so many colors, it's like I'm at a rave.
Here you go, Tom. I don't know what we're waiting for, but can you please hurry it up?
Can I borrow your glasses?
What if you were the one with the disability?
There's not much more I can say about that one. I'll just move on. So now I get to talk about Pride Industries. What drives us to employ people with disabilities and how did we get here? Our mission is simple. We create employment for people with disabilities. Our vision is an inclusive world where people of all abilities have equal access to achieve their employment goals. We've recently redesigned our core values. You can see integrity, teamwork, tenacity, innovation. We lead our company with this. As you can see, it's our backdrop and our background. We all use it, and we try to tell individuals with disabilities that these are the 4 values that you can take with you to work. We're simple, We were founded in 1966 in the basement of a church in Auburn, California. A group of parents whose children left their high school and became adults and were sitting around doing nothing. So in the basement of a church, they started wrapping Christmas presents to be paid. And then they put together ashtrays for someone, and it evolved to today, where we have a little more than 6,300 employees, and 3,700 of them are employees with disabilities. By numbers of employees, that makes us the leader of people with disabilities in the United States. Our business model is a little different from yours. It's unique. Not only do we prepare people for employment outside of Pride Industries, but also within Pride Industries, and we help them from the beginning and stay with them. So we provide on-the-job supports for individuals who we employ and who others employ. And we also provide independent living services for individuals. So they're excited, they have their real job, they're making money. The next step is independence. Most of the time it's leaving their parents' home or their care facility, and we provide services that allow them to become independent if that's something that they want. Transportation is typically the number one barrier for people with disabilities, regardless of their industry or their disability. And we work with transportation services to secure, sometimes it's Uber, sometimes it's paid transportation, sometimes it's taxis. Oftentimes it's coworkers where we help them set up commute shared rides. So more than 50% of our workforce has a disclosed disability. And every day we prove the success of an inclusive workforce hiring model across the array of industries. And that's not only industries that we're in with, but outside industries. And I would challenge you, are people with disabilities included in your diversity and inclusion program? Do you have an ERG within your department for people with disabilities? And then I don't know if any of you met or knew Michael Ziegler. He was our CEO for a very long time, and I love to share his quote: "The magic that happens when someone that typically cannot get a job finally gets a job, it's incredible. Their lives change." Everyone that works at Pride Industries knows that people with disabilities can accomplish anything. And he lived by that. And then I would just offer our contact information, and I can share this PowerPoint with anyone who would like it. We have an IAMABLE helpline, so that's an 800 number. Anyone can contact that number. If you find someone that you want to hire who may disclose a disability and you think they might need extra supports, we can help with that. If you're interested in setting up a recruiting event for people with disabilities, please let us know. In fact, we have a job fair at McClellan Air Force Base on October 18th that's slated specifically for people with disabilities, and we're happy to support anyone who's interested in that. And with that, it becomes a thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to share my passion and what I do. And I'll open it up for questions, and I'm not bashful. Anything you want to ask.
Well, Darylyn, I'll just go ahead and start by saying thank you for coming. I mean, that was the blessing. And I did see one comment in the chat, so I don't know if Sinead wanted to go off mute and read your comment, or if she wants me to read it.
I'm reading it, actually. It's the job fair, and I'm putting it in the chat.
Wonderful.
It's October 18th.
Is that related to the ending event at the Capitol?
It is in conjunction with, but the job fair is separate.
Okay.
And if you would like me to, I can email Jessica the link for the job fair.
Oh, I would love that. And also the power.
Absolutely. And Crip Camp, I've seen it twice. I saw your note there, Jessica. I can't actually get through it without stopping it a few times.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable that people with disabilities went through so much. I mean, they need it. I mean, 28 days. I couldn't handle 28 protesting without the toothbrush and all the things I need, but let alone services and amazing.
No, and I will tell you that Judy was part of that protest. I don't know that she stayed the 28 days, but that was one that she led. So she came clear across the United States. And there are many, many YouTube documentaries, interviews with Judy. She wanted to become a teacher. So she went to college. She went to college. And the very first interview she went to, the Teachers Association said that they couldn't have her there because she would be a distraction. She fought to become a teacher. She has some great stories. I feel bad that I didn't fill your hour, but I also gave you a lot of information in a short amount of time.
Really.
Other questions, comments, anything you think we can do for you? Do you all have a people with disabilities ERG?
I know we have an ad hoc working group within the DAC, and the OCR office works on reasonable accommodations, and so it is in our framework of things that we consider.
Perfect.
And we had a presentation by Department of Rehabilitation, and they gave a lot of good resources. Talked about the ADAs,
Perfect.
Section 503, and she offered up the Jan website.
The job.
But it's for anyone who needs to learn about a disability. It was like amazing how you can just learn everything about it just from one resource. I can go ahead and put that in the chat here as well for people that didn't attend the other lunch.
Yeah, the Jan is a great resource and it's free.
Yep.
We partner with the Department of Rehabilitation daily to provide opportunities for people. They're a great resource, and they're going through some changes where they're becoming more individualized. So our industry went through a change 2 years ago, a good change, by the way, where we took, if you can imagine, we have systems and processes and programs, and we were plugging people into what already existed. We went to person-centered planning so that now we look at the individual. We don't look at what programs we have, but we define and decide what they need based upon what they'd like. So we have different programs popping up all over the place because of the individualized process. And the Department of Rehab had a tough time getting on board with that. And they've made a shift in the last year of understanding that it's about what the person wants and what their goals are, and it may not fit what we already have. I have to give them credit.
Right. I don't know if you mentioned why July was chosen for Disability Pride Month. Was there a reason for July?
In conjunction with the celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Yeah. Yeah, that's a fairly new identification of a celebration. I think it's 4 years old. And I don't know if you had your lunch and learn on purpose that today was the 33rd anniversary of the ADA.
I did.
I had an all teams meeting earlier with my team, which is, 450 people, and it's in a team's atmosphere. And I started off with kind of birthday celebrations for the ADA.
Wow, that's wonderful. I would just like to add also that you mentioned folks with autism are a large population of people that end up jobs. And we did an autism acceptance brown bag. It was in April. And I just came across one of the videos, a Pride Industries video about people with autism who worked at a brewery in Auburn.
Oh, knee deep.
Oh, yes, knee deep. And it was the cutest thing ever. Just wanted to mention that. It's just another example of the great things you do.
Oh, it's awesome. And in fact, if I get up, it'll show everything, but I have a can from this year's run. So every year they dedicate one label to Autism Awareness Month. And this year the label has our individuals that work in the brewery as character cartoons on their label. Yeah. They're an awesome company. We're also at the airport. If you fly in and out of Sacramento Airport, you'll see that we have custodial groups. They're called supported employment groups. So it's 3 individuals to 1 job coach. And I just recently looked at our statistics, and of the people that are working at the airport, 72% of them are people who identify as having autism. And those are great repetitive jobs.
I'd like to also add all your meeting tips, and those would be good for anybody.
Right?
What's the meeting about?
You know, I agree with you. I'm kind of weird that way. If somebody pops a meeting onto my team's calendar and it doesn't say why, I sometimes hover over the decline button before I'll reach out and say why. Yeah. Yeah. You know, another place is Thunder Valley Casino. I'd never been there before, but we have 14, maybe 15 people working at Thunder Valley Casino. And I was really concerned because of the lights and the noise and the activity. And there's just so much going on. And one of our job coaches asked for and received headphones for individuals that work out there. And through the headphones, they're allowed to play whatever, you know, books, music, whatever it is that keeps them focused. So that was an accommodation that didn't require a lot of money. I think they were less than $100 for each headset.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I can go on forever. Obviously 26 years. I have a lot of stories.
Do you have other testimonials on your website? Forgive me if I didn't dig too deep into that.
Oh, we do. We
Stories.
absolutely do. We have stories. We have a really robust PR person. Her name is Kat Maduru.
Oh,
She
yeah.
used to be in radio. And she uses our social media platforms daily to put up stories. And in fact, I think if you just join our Pride Industries LinkedIn, every single day you can have something pop up.
Oh, that's great. We'll make sure to share that as a resource
Okay,
on DAC
awesome.
website.
Perfect. So I will share with you the PowerPoint and the flyer for the job fair. Anything else I can do for you, Jessica, or anyone else?
If anyone else has any questions, I'd like to open it up. You can either put your question in the chat or take yourself off mute. Seeing any hands going up, so you must have covered everything.
Well, that's okay. I'm not too hard to find.
Just thank you again for taking the time.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Let me know if there's ever anything we can do to help support.
Absolutely. I think sharing this 1-800 number will be really helpful for a lot of people in the department.
Perfect. I'll email them over the minute I hang up.
Wonderful. And I can share our recording with you as well.
Okay.
Presentation.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a fabulous ADA birthday today.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Great day.